is everyone? I'm going live again because I had so much fun with the reaction video on GenZ Bible translation. I wanted to hit a hot button topic, and that is the video recently released by Lil Nas X. And yeah, I know it's offensive to some. It is very, very not my kind of music. Don't get me wrong, I love different kinds of music. This is not something I would have listened to on a personal, regular basis, though. Okay, so just, bear with me on that. I'm not in some way trying to tell you all that he did wrong. Let me kind of square this thing up here. But yeah, this is definitely a stretch for me. So bear with me. I'm still trying to sort through all of the lyrics and everything. So I'm going to get to the video in just a second, but I want to put this in place because I think listening to the video is necessary, but also knowing what's being said as you go into it. I caught it bad just today. You hit me with a call to your place. Yeah, I don't want anyone to feel like that I am judging or criticizing. I am just basically wanting to respond to what's happening in the culture. So, yeah, it has words that many people in conservative Christianity find offensive and uncomfortable. There are themes in it that looks like it is drug and alcohol related, so yeah, that would be offensive to some. I see the N word, but that's a word that is being argued and debated on its own situation and merit, so I'm not going to enter into that. What I want to do is I want to talk about what this video means in terms of the culture. So let me bring my screen back down here, put myself back here, and let's see what happens.
In life, we hide the parts of ourselves we don't want the world to see.
Before he even starts singing, in life, we hide the parts of ourselves we don't want others to see. I relate in so many ways. As a cross-dresser, I hid that part of myself from everyone, including my wife and my family growing up. As a pastor, I hid my political views. I hid my sex positivity views. In many ways, I had to choke down the things that were being said around me just so I could function. I didn't stand up for them because that would reduce my effectiveness. But of course, the big one is hiding my authentic self. As a transgender woman, I never showed that before a year ago. I hid it from the world. And now I'm living something that people have to see.
We lock them away. We tell them no. We ban.
Sorry about the ad there, folks. Let's get rid of that. Okay.
Them. But here, we don't. Welcome to Montero. I caught it bad just today. You hit me with a call to your place. Ain't been out in a while anyway. Was
the imagery right here of what is happening in the Garden of Eden is amazing. The snake, the serpent. Oh shoot! I hope I didn't freeze up. Okay, the serpent is just marvelous. I love how this imagery is being played out. I love the image of the tree, because the tree doesn't. It's not an apple. So that really kind of intrigues me that this imagery is being used.
hoping I could catch you throwing smiles in my face. Romantic talking, you don't even have to try. You're cute enough to fuck with me tonight. Looking at the table, all I see is bleeding white. Baby, you living the life, but nigga, you ain't living right. Cocaine and drinking with your friends. You live in the dark, boy, I cannot pretend. I'm not faced, only here to sin. If you've been in your garden, you know that you can. Call me when you want, call me when you need. Call me in the morning, I'll be on the way. Call me when you want, call me when...
There is still a tradition that hangs around in the church that I find reprehensible. That tradition is bound up in the idea that sin and original sin are somehow linked to sex. That the woman tempted the man in the garden with sex. And here is where it just blows my mind how much is read into the story of the garden. We have no indication, one way or the other, in Genesis chapter 2, that sex is not already a part of the life of the man and the woman in the garden. In fact, if we project human experience without regard to sin now back onto the man and the woman in the garden, then they were created sexual beings. And if they were created sexual beings, then it is very likely that they were sexual in the time of being in right relationship with God. In fact, I would go so far as to say that in terms of the marriage covenant being a representation of kind of the original communion of God to the beings in the garden, there is the two become one is a line from traditional marriage rites, and let no one put asunder. And the erotic imagery that can be associated with that is just overwhelming. And so God creates these two individuals, one from the other, and separates them, but creates within them an innate need to rejoin with one another. That's the sexual drive. So to say that sex is related to the original sin, no, I don't think so. I think sex is related to the original creation, which was good. Very good. Part of the overall plan. So when we see this video and we see the serpent becoming sexually engaged with the representation of the humans in the garden, I think Lil Nas is trying to say that the church is perpetuating something that isn't necessarily a guilt or shame thing. We have that drive. We have a sex drive. It is a part of who we are. So, yeah, I like this part.
Call me out by your name, I'll be on the way like
Okay, the Greek is from Plato. Real quick, history lesson. The Old Testament, which includes the story of the garden in the book of Genesis, is from the Hebrew tradition through the Jewish culture that was preserved in Greek. So the stories of the Old Testament are in Greek, but originally they were a Hebrew language, which was a Canaanite language. The fact that Lil Nas uses Plato instead of something from the Bible may be something to pay attention to.
hey, I wanna sell at your
Does anybody else get Hunger Games vibes here?
buying. I wanna feel on your ass in Hawaii. I want that jet lag from fucking and flying. Shoot a shot in your mouth while I'm riding.
Wow. The imagery here. The Colosseum is, that is very tied to Christian tradition. The Colosseum is where many forms of persecution were finalized. We have stories from historians, but more importantly, we have stories from early church accounts of the events that happened to Christian believers. Now, we know that Lil Nas is making a statement. He's making a statement against how Christian churches treat people like him, people like me, and they are quick to judge, and they are quick to put us in a forum where we can be critically dealt with. The whole issue of the laws that are being passed right now across the country is about making transgender individuals go away. It is, when you stop and you consider that those of us who are advocating for transgender youth, gender affirming care, we are telling legislators, we are telling governors, we are telling anyone who will give a damn and listen that these kids are going to kill themselves. 41% of transgender people attempt suicide. That's not counting the ones that succeed. That's not counting the ones who are planning it at any given time. And the reality is the church is pushing this. People who are wanting to drag us into a forum, and they want to chain us, and they want to, as we're going to see here in just a second, stone us. Yeah, I identify with Lil Nas in this. I do connect with what is going on in this video in a very personal and real way. The other day I was watching a movie for my sex coach classes. It's the movie Dangerous Beauty, and it's from, I think, 1998. It's a few years old. And it's the story of a courtesan in Venice in the 16th century. And it's a really good movie. It's phenomenal. It's about 2 hours long. And I got to the last 30 minutes of the movie and I had to turn it off because throughout the movie, the courtesan who is featured there, who was a real person, by the way, she has integrated herself into the Venetian society. And she has pretty much screwed everyone in prominence and power, including the church. We see religious individuals coming to her for her sexual services. But a plague hits Venice in the 16th century, and the church begins to denounce the courtesans and the prostitutes. Not because they are transmitting the plague. No, that's not it at all. What they are saying is that God is judging Venice because Venice has allowed them to continue. And just the visceral scenes of the mob trying to get to the leading character, it caused me to have an anxiety reaction, and I had to turn the movie off. And then I had to write my curriculum supervisors and say, y'all, I love the movie, but this is what happened. This video is making a point. The church is willing to adopt the culture in order to fight against the things they don't approve of. The imagery of the Colosseum is Roman. It was the Romans who were persecuting the Christians. And now Linnaeus is using the imagery of the Colosseum down to the representations of the Caesars and the gods of the Roman culture, and yet speaking out against the church. I encourage you to read the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is not as much about the end times as it is about the current times. And what I mean by that is, yeah, the book of Revelation is trying to create the picture of how time and space and matter are enfolded in the end, but it's also a political and social commentary on the church. And the political and social commentary that the writer presents is, if the church embraces and begins to carry out the image of the church, of the culture around them, they've lost their place in connection with God. Fascinating, isn't it? The garden, this just comes to me, so I'm going to share this with you. The garden is a representation of the man and the woman failing God and losing their place in the garden. And now we have the picture of the church embracing the culture. And the book of Revelation says very explicitly, if you do that, if the church embraces the culture, then they lose their place in the garden.
Oh, I mean, a sign of the times every time that I speak. A dime and a nine, it was mine every week. What a time and incline, God was shining on me. Now I can't leave, and now I'm making hella Italy. Never want the niggas that's in my league. I wanna fuck the ones I envy. I envy.
right there, the stoning. Let's go back just a second. Okay, I'm glad I went back, because the stoning is very interesting. He's stoned with a butt plug. If you don't know what that is, it is a sexual toy that is inserted into the anal opening, and it is partly to stimulate pleasure. And that is a very serious condemnation, that the church was using it to execute him. Also notice, it hits him in the forehead, right where David hit Goliath with the stone.
Cocaine and drinking with your friends. You live in the dark, boy, I cannot pretend.
Okay, I don't know what's going on in his head right now, but I do know what is going on in my head. He thinks he's gotten the reward. He thinks he's going to make it. The ultimate tease is to see the gates of heaven opened up to you, and an angel is coming down to escort you into the reward.
Face, don't let you to sin. If you've been in your garden, you know that you can.
Okay. Wow. Now, this may be me, but again, the imagery here it's subtle. Strangely, the heavens opening up looks a lot like the vaginal wall.
If you've been in your garden, you know.
And a rod coming up through that. This is a very sexual video. It's a critique of culture's view on sexuality and the sexual act. And I think all of these things are intentional. I think that this is a very blatant picture of something that the world does not want, well, the American culture in its religious influence doesn't want to deal with publicly.
That you can call me when you want, call me when you need, call me in the morning, I'll be on the way. Call me when you want, call me when you need, call me out by your name, I'll be on the way. Like, call me by your name, tell me you love me in private, call me by your name. I do not care if you're lying. You want me, call me, I'll drop everything. Don't need your fuck it, let's try it.
Okay. Oh gosh. This part of the video is where so many people are going to turn it off and they're going to say, this is horrible, this is terrible. But bear with me on this one just a second. Okay. Now, this is where I want to come back in and really hack some people off. I want to offend some people with this. Yes, there is a lot of sexual content, and it is explicit, and it is very obvious. There is nothing hidden in that. But it's also, in a very graphic, explicit way, Christological in a mythological sense. What I mean by that is mythology is the telling of stories. Mythology is using stories to create understanding in the worldview. And when we talk about some of the methods and understandings of atonement, which is the understanding of what was accomplished through Jesus and what happened to Jesus throughout life and death and resurrection. Atonement is about that connection, that reconnecting of humanity with God through Jesus. Now, a couple of the different models of atonement deal with the subject of Christ defeating Satan in some way. But that's exactly what's going on in this story. In fact, not only is atonement about Christ defeating Satan in some way, but it's also about Christ gaining control and power over Satan in a situation where it looks like he is rendered powerless. Death is attributed to Satan. And Christ died on the cross and was buried. And depending on your Christian tradition, descended to hell. Now, come on. That's exactly what happens here. And not only does it look like Christ is submitted to Satan and Satan's control and Satan's power, but in the grave there is a very sexual connotation there. The grave is seen as, well, in French, the idea of orgasm is considered a little death. So there is this merging of the concepts of death, grave, and sex. So break it down. An individual is killed, executed by the religious powers using the culture of the politics around them. They descend to hell, where it would appear that they have been overcome, that they are in the submissive role, that they are the fairer and weaker in the control and consent relationship. And then, using that very same control and consent loss, they defeat Satan. And not only that, they assume the crown of his kingdom. And if that's not biblical, then you probably need to go back and read again. Because the concept of Christ as victor is associated with the idea of the assumption of control and power, assuming the kingdom. And that's the message of the atonement, leading to the ascension and the return of Christ in the end. When he returns, his preeminence as King of Kings and Lord of Lords is finalized. This is a deep video, y'all. This is not just about sex. It is not just about being gay. This is Theology 101. It just sometimes gets lost. So, if you're hanging out with me and you made it all the way through the video, thank you so much. And really, go back and watch. Pick out the scenes. Look and see what the message is. Because